Welcome to pro tip number 71, from inventory to action. In today's pro tip, I'm going to walk you through taking some of the inventory data you've synchronized from Lansweeper into JSM assets, and we're then going to start using that data to drive some of our automation rules. Now, in today's example, I'm going to walk you through how to set up an automation rule to improve your offboarding process. So, for those that have offboarding currently set up, or maybe for those that don't, one of the things you're going to need to make this work is you're first going to need a request type to capture all of your data for the offboarding user. Doesn't have to be complex. One of the things you will need is a field that lists all the employee assets data. So here's a field called employees that I've created that looks at the object schema for Lansweeper, looks at the user object type, and returns the values here. So right now I've selected this user for offboarding. And I've got some other fields that are mandatory, like last working day, resignation date. Your form could vary. Just make sure you are capturing the user that is offboarding. Now, once you get all that data submitted, you can go ahead and send. And this is going to go ahead and send that in as Jira Service Management to be triaged and worked through resolution. Now, what's going to happen next is where the automation rule comes into play. So I've got a rule I've created called Pro Tip 71, Employee Offboarding. And let's take a peek at this so you can get an idea of what's required to make this improvement to your offboarding process. So one of the goals with the use case here is to go ahead and use automation to populate the request as it comes into IT support with all the assets that are associated to the user. So how I set this up first is I set up a trigger. Now my trigger is looking for the work item being created, and I've set up some conditional logic here that makes sure that the request type equals my offboarding request. This way it only triggers off of offboarding requests that are logged. Now that's the first step. Once you've got this configured, and it is very simple to configure, your next step is going to be an action for doing your lookup objects. So this is where the automation rule starts to bring in some of the context or the information from assets. So setting this up is relatively straightforward. One of the things you'll need to do first is set up your schema and map it to your schema for Lansweeper. So mine is called LSV2. This contains all my Lansweeper integration objects. So I've selected that first. Now, next up, I'm looking for the user attribute to equal the issued out employees. That was that custom field that I showed you earlier. So you'll want to make sure you have this syntax copied and pasted here, and that's all going to be in our pro tip. Just make sure you update this value here with the name of your custom field that you're using to capture the employee that is offboarding. Now, once you've saved this, your next step is going to be some conditional logic. So I've got an if block here that's going to do a simple condition match. What I've got my condition set up to do is take a look at the lookup objects we defined above. If the condition is does not equal, and I've got empty or null as my value set here, what we're doing here is basically looking and doing a sanity check. If there is no data in lookup objects, stop here, don't move any further. But if it is not empty, if it does contain some objects, go ahead and move forward to the next step. And for us, that next step is going to be an edit work items field action. So here we're going to select the field we want to update. So in my environment, I've got a field called reporters assets. In your environment, what you'll want to do is make sure you've got a field called something similar that you can use that stores the objects from assets that is assigned to the user. Now, you can have this be an assets field that shows that's not filtered on anything, or you can have one that has a filter that's only showing assets assigned to the reporter. That's what I recommend. I've got that set up in our environment. I've got a pro tip, I believe, for that one as well. So if you don't have that one there, go ahead and look it up in our documentation. You can easily create this field here. Once that's created, you can start using some syntax from AQL like this. So we see key in, lookup objects. So what this is going to do is look at all the keys we have that match the criteria in lookup objects. So we're going to edit the reporter assets field with those objects. Whether I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 20, I believe is the limit you can actually have associated in this field for your lookup objects that were associated to that particular that user there, and put that in that field. And next up, what I do is I take that and I also do the same thing, and I put that information in internal notes too. Yeah, this is completely optional, but it's something I like to do. So I'm basically doing the same thing, but just putting it in the comments so other people can see it as well. If I didn't happen to see the field that I updated with the associated assets. Now, this is a simple example. What I'd recommend is you start here and you can always build on top of this. Maybe down the road, you want to have individual subtasks that are logged for each piece of equipment you want to return or to grab from that offboarding user. That's something you can easily do through the automation rules in Atlassian. So with that configuration, when you do log an offboarding request, if we look at this from the agent's perspective, we should see the automation rule is fired and we start seeing our associated assets. So here we can kind of see that in action. We see reporter assets has been updated with the D001, which happens to be associated to that user. We can double check that by scrolling down and finding the user, and that does in fact equal the offboarding user value there. So looking down at the bottom, we can also see that that comment that I've added showing up here as well. So it really is that simple to get started leveraging your Lansweeper data integrated into JSM assets with Atlassian automation rules. The great thing about automation rules pulling from assets is that data is normalized and it can be used over and over again without editing that automation rule. Unless you change your fields or unless you make a structural change, this automation rule is going to serve you in your projects for years to come. I hope you found this tip super helpful and be on the lookout for more pro tips between Lansweeper and Jira Service Management. Have a great day.